Niklas Ninas for hosting this meeting. So Niklas, you are a member of the European Parliament for the Green Group. You are a member of the Regional Development Committee and a co-chair of the European Parliament Intergroup on rural, mountainous, remote area and smart villages. And it's a real honor for us to have this event hosted by you. And I'll just let you to introduce formally this event. Thank you, Niklas.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating today for this event on a very important yet sadly always ongoing topic, one that we actually, I think, should have already been dismantled by now. I think to start off this meeting, it is very important to state one issue, and that is that housing, affordable housing, is not a privilege of a few, but a right for all. And that's an issue on that we must deliver. And that also means that you must have the physical possibility to actually rent a house, to live in your own four walls, maybe some more, but to have the possibility to draw back into your own privacy. And that means affordable housing is a must and a necessity for all cities, municipalities, and of course, villages and rural areas as well. There is thankfully a lot of movement in this issue of affordable housing, but sometimes we also must state that just movement is just not enough. We need deliverance on several issues. I personally am from Germany, and in Germany we just had a report on the issues of affordable housing because the government presented 2 years ago their master plan, their offensive for renewable affordable housing, and they wanted to build 1.5 million new social housing opportunities. That is way too few than what we actually would need, but still they did not deliver on that goal, and we have only 1.3 million housing opportunities being built, and they are a lot of times way too expensive. So movement is there, big headlines are being produced, but results are not coming in as they are needed, and that is a big issue that we are seeing at the moment. And it's a good reason why we must keep up the discussion and the fight for affordable living. I personally live in a city that presents how we can moderate the market itself. In my city of Rostock, a huge chunk of the whole apartment market and the living market, housing market, is owned by a community-owned organization. So basically, the city owns 1/3 of all the apartments and all the housing opportunities in Rostock. An additional big chunk is owned by community-owned apartment companies, and this means that prices are being kept relatively low. We can moderate the price for the whole market by keeping 1/3 of the prices due to state-owned apartments relatively low, making it harder for investors to raise prices exceedingly, as we see in many other big cities at the moment. This is a model that is not just fruitful for people who want to rent, but also for the city itself, because the investments that cities make can be taken on time over a very long time, because cities exist way longer than investors. So the cities that we built 50 years ago are now really paying also our means of transportation, also our means of renovation, of building new housing opportunities. And that's a very good motive for the city itself. We do not need big return of investments because we have the time with cities and municipalities. So one part of the solution must be that cities and municipalities get the possibility to actually invest in new housing opportunities. And for that, I think we all know that cities and municipalities are always in a broke situation. They basically never have money and never have the funds, but it is an important investment that they can make with this, delivering on two issues. First of all, to establish funds for the future, and also, of course, and that's the main issue, to make affordable housing possible. So what do we need to do from the European and also national level to ensure that cities and municipalities have the possibility to actually build affordable housing. First of all, I think we need to cheapen the price for housing itself, for building itself. But that does not mean that we must lose on ecological standards and on comfortable standards. So, excuse me, European Bauhaus initiative could be a solution, because the European Bauhaus initiative, while we are not exactly sure in which direction this will go, to be quite honest, the Commission is not very far with their ideas, but I want to mention it here because I think it could be an important initiative. That means we make a plan for affordable housing and we give subsidies for this, and that also combine affordable housing with ecological standards of the Green Deal that we're seeing at the moment in the Commission. The Commission itself is in a design phase, so it doesn't really know where it wants to go with it. So it's taking on a lot of voices from the public, and I want to raise it here to really bring in your voice and to go to European, you can Google it, it's easier because they don't have an own website for it, but you can there deliver for your ideas for categories to involve projects, etc., to really share the light on affordable housing for cities and municipalities. And the second issue to make it possible for cities to actually build more is to give them the funds for it, structural funds, of course, and also the housing funds that we have in the European Union, which is, I think, a good start. But we must face it also, the European funds, while they seem always big, we're talking about a very big number of people living in the European Union, and therefore it's actually not so big as the national funds. We need additional funding from national sources for the cities and municipalities, and they should make it a task for the cities to make affordable living possible, and should give them the money for it to do so. But we must also face, I think, on one issue, and that is taking a little bit the pressure out of the cities. And there is, it's good as co-chair of the rural areas intergroup to also mention rural areas here. Rural areas can, of course, be of help to ease the pressure on the housing market in cities. And that's being used a lot. And we see actually a lot of people moving out of cities, going into villages, going into rural areas to live there, which is great, which supports the rural areas to really build up more structures to make it more attractive to live there, which is all a very fine thing. But we must not underestimate one issue. Rural areas and villages are not a place to just go there to have a cheap living opportunity. They are also a place of culture and community. And if you're not ready to dive into a village community and a village culture, then rural areas are maybe not the place for you to live. And I think that's important to bring together, that we want to build communities and vital and vibrant communities in rural areas. And for that, we must also ensure that not too much new building is being done outside of the center of the village, because that just fades out the whole structure of the housing, of the living opportunities there. So, but we must also ensure that people who don't have the additional funds have the possibility to live in villages if they so wish. And that means that we must have cheap and affordable housing opportunities as well in rural areas. So not only single houses for single families, but also apartment buildings. And also what we must ensure, and that's a very, very important issue, is a cheap and fair commute. You must be able to travel into the village that you want to live or that you're living in, and to come across the rural areas, to go to your working place, and to just have cultural exchange with friends and so on for an affordable price, and also for everybody in every age group under every circumstances, which means outside of the car issue. So if you're a young person and you want to, you know, celebrate or live in or go to school or anything, we need transportation possibilities for them. We need transportation possibilities for all older people who just don't want to drive anymore. And also, let's face it, if you're going to an event and you want to drink a beer or two, you should also have this possibility to come back home afterwards without driving your own car. So we need rural areas also a commute situation that is affordable, that is fast, and that makes it possible to live there as well as in cities, so that people really have the choice where they want to live and where they want to have their field of privacy. I wanted to give in these ideas as a very first input for fruit of thought. I'm very thankful that you're all here taking the time to discuss this important issue. I hope that we don't just deliver on more movement, but also deliver on more changes, and that we can ensure that living is really a right and not a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niklas, for this introduction. Again, welcome to those who joined us later. I'm Clotilde, I work for FIANSA, but this meeting is an initiative of FIANSA together with the Fondation Abbé Pierre and Housing Europe. So together we have developed a partnership on housing solutions. It's called the Housing Solutions Platform. And the idea is to work together to find housing solutions to address the housing crisis and particularly homelessness. So thank you, Niklas, for this introduction. I will just give you a bit an overview of the speakers who are coming now. So we will start the meeting with Chris Jacob Crisioni from the European Commission Joint Research Center. Thank you, Chris, for being here. Chris will tell us about, will present an overview of territorial shrinkage and growth, and look at the consequences on the housing market. So you will be setting the scene for debate. After that, Chloe from FIANSA will present a research on shrinking territories in the EU and the potential challenge and opportunities for the right to housing for all. Then after that, we will have Josefina Bengochea and Conrado Jimenez. Both of them are working for the Madrina Foundation in Spain, and you particularly have a project of repopulation of rural ghost town for homeless families in Spain. So we're looking forward to hear from your project. And last but certainly not least, we'll have Merik Osgunes and Panos Atsiprokiou, sorry for that, working for the city of Thessaloniki in Greece, and who will tell us about your perspective on shrinking cities and the consequences on housing. And then Sarah Kupchou from the Fondation Abbé Pierre will conclude this meeting. So thank you for all the panelists to be here, and I really hope the participants feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box so we can have an interactive debate. That's it, you won't hear so much from me now. I'll leave the floor to Chris to start with the setting the scene. Thank you very much for being here, Chris.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. As Clotilde said, I'm Chris. I work for the Territorial Development Unit at the Joint Research Center in ISPRA. We are a scientific advisory part of the European Commission. We try and give independent scientific evidence. And we are involved in the question of depopulation in Europe because we're very interested in some of the external effects that you would get from depopulation, for example, service access. Clotilde asked me to set the scene for you. So what I want to do is talk about where depopulation happens in Europe right now, why it is happening in a very general and rough way. And I would like to quickly point out some of the opportunities and some of the challenges of using depopulation to combat homelessness. So are we going to find abandoned houses? Could we transform them into an opportunity to provide a home for someone that doesn't have a home? So usually when I talk about depopulation, I would like to start with sort of a simple practical example. Unfortunately, I'm from the Netherlands. Well, unfortunately, that's what it is. We don't have a lot of depopulation in the Netherlands. So I always borrow my wife's history for a small practical anecdotal example. My wife is from Sardegna. I hope that I can, there you go. From a small village in Sardegna, which has been facing depopulation for quite a while, roughly since the 1990s. And what I always say is every time we go back there, we meet less people in the village and we visit more acquaintances on the graveyard. Um, for a long time now, this village is depopulating, and right now it is quite an old population. And yeah, at the end, if you get old, right, it is only one outcome of your life. So what we're seeing, especially recently, is that this village is depopulating very rapidly. Um, and when you start to look at why it's depopulating, well, in the general in Europe, I think there's two situations of depopulation. Um, in the Mediterranean, you will find that most youngsters have left their hometowns, mostly in the 1990s. At least that's often the case in Italy, where my wife's generation, these are 17 cousins of my wife, and where they ended up. 6 of them stayed in Sardegna, and 11 of them moved out of Sardegna. They're all having children now, but they're not having children in Sardegna, they're having children all over Europe, basically. And the effect is that you end up with a village with hardly any children, right? So what you start to see is that depopulation in Mediterranean countries, typically it happens because the young have left a long time ago, do not have children anymore in their place of origin, and the population just ages. Then we have another part of Europe, new member states, Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, where immigration to the northwest in particular, it's a very recent phenomenon. And it's really the young that are leaving Estonia, Lithuania, Poland. They're leaving these countries right now, and they're leaving a big gap there in the societies. There you go. Now, how that plays out in terms of recent depopulation, I tried to start with understanding how this affects cities across Europe. So the map you're looking at is showing very recent data that we produced on population decline between 2011 and 2018. I selected only large municipalities with at least 75,000 inhabitants. If you have a very big blue bottom circle, implies that there's at least 1% annual decline. So that's substantial depopulation in my book. It's a small bluish circle, you get less than 1% annual decline, still some depopulation, maybe not so much. And all the black dots, there's no population decline at all. And then what you see is, well, we see some depopulation happening in Spain, mostly substantial depopulation happening in cities in the new member states, right? So that's Bulgaria, that's Romania, that's Lithuania. This map does not tell the whole story because, as Clotilde just pointed out, a lot of the depopulation is just not happening in cities. As a matter of fact, what we're seeing is a very consistent process of depopulation happening in rural areas because people are leaving rural areas and they're going to cities. So if I show the whole map, all the municipalities, and again, dark blue is substantial depopulation, light blue is some depopulation. You start to see that large parts of the EU territory are, as a matter of fact, depopulating. And above all, in rural areas, much more than in cities. And I think that's crucial. And we're going to talk about how depopulation can be an opportunity for homelessness. It's going to be the question of, can we provide houses in rural areas for people that are homeless in cities? So some of the points that the previous speaker just made, I think they're very on point, right? We need to think about how to integrate them, how to work with this. Last map, and then I'll stop showing you maps, right? So this is Madrid. Madrid is a very nice example of what's happening with population decline in Europe. At least in pre-COVID times, there's been some signs that people are slowly moving back to rural areas. I'm not sure if that's a persistent process or if it's just people that are going to escape the cities, because if you're not going to have all the bars and restaurants in place, then why not just live in the countryside anyway, right? But come back again to the cities? I don't know. I really don't. What you see in Madrid is that around Madrid, there's been quite some population growth in the city itself, or at least it's been stable. And then from 1.5 hour onward, you get substantial depopulation in the countryside. So if you're further than 1.5 hours away from Madrid, right, basically this this ring around the city. If you're further away than that, you're probably going to depopulate. And you can see the same thing in Berlin. You can see the same thing around Paris, for example. It's quite a consistent thing. Seems that 1.5 hours sort of the maximum range that a city still exerts influence on its environment. Also means that depopulation, well, it's rarely close to cities, and probably going to be close to cities most of all in massively depopulating countries such as the new member states. The reason why depopulation is happening is above all, if you look at the left graph, we've seen that we've had employment growth in Europe, right? If you look at the total economy, employment growth has been substantial. We've seen a productivity growth, but there's been a big change in sectors between those two factors. So we've seen a massive productivity growth in agriculture, linked with a loss of jobs in agriculture. In other words, you just need less people on those farming fields to produce the same amount of food. Rural communities are mostly based on agriculture. Of course, if you don't need all those people to produce your food, these people are going to be either unemployed in a rural area or they're going to move to someplace where they actually have a job. Same story for manufacturing, although less strongly, a bit of growth and decline in employment, massive productivity growth. And where we've seen a massive growth in employment is in the services sector. And those services are predominantly urban economy. Because of a bunch of reasons I won't go into. So what you see is that this big shift in let's say the sectors of our economies is driving that people are likely to go to cities and leave rural areas. And I'm showing data from 1995 to 2005. But if you're going to squint your eyes a bit and look at the general process, this has been going on roughly since before Christ. Whenever there's a growth in agricultural productivity, you're going to have that more people can live in cities. So they do. And this is not necessarily a bad process. It's a very basic economic process. Linked to that is that people that have higher education in the EU is consistently growing, both in the old member states and in the new member states. And those people are probably going to be less likely to want to work in those agricultural fields as well, right? Again, higher education employment is more typically in cities. So there you get another drive that people would prefer to go to cities, or at least the environment of cities, than stay in very rural areas. So that's an economic driving force. Emigration is not all about work. So if you look at the graph at the right, you're seeing the percentage of migrants that move away from a country, and why they are moving away. Well, when this was asked, Italy had the biggest percentage of people that moved away for work primarily, and that was only 55% of people, right? So even for Italy, 45% of people did not move away for work, but for other reasons. And if I go back to my little anecdote of my wife's family, I asked her cousins. First of all, they all said, well, I moved away. I'm never going to go back to Sardegna. I'd love to visit there for the holidays, but I won't live there anymore. Some of my wife's cousins, indeed moved away to get a job somewhere else. Others moved away to get a university education, and then they stayed where they're living now because they found skilled work there. Others moved away because they found a partner. My wife moved away because she reunified with her father who lived abroad for some time already. And one of my wife's nephews, he is homosexual. Her hometown is very conservative. He just did not feel at home in that rural place, and he moved away to one of the Canarian Islands, as a matter of fact. Right? There's lots of sometimes very personal reasons why depopulation happens, and it's definitely not all about the economy. Now, I will soon stop. Don't worry, bear with me. Does population decline mean that there's a housing opportunity for the homeless? Yes, to some degree. Population decline will lead to more free homes and at a cheaper price in declining areas. I think one of the big processes that we're seeing in Europe right now is that cities are rapidly becoming very unaffordable in some rural areas. Houses are becoming very cheap, right? In some parts of Italy, you can buy a house now, a decent house, for the price of a small family car, which I find attractive, which probably is a nice solution, but there's a spatial mismatch there that we need to tackle. Um, does it mean that every popular person lost in a region is going to end up with, let's say, one additional abandoned house in that region? Population decline is often offset because our households are getting smaller, so we just have less people per house. You can see that on the right in that graph. That's the recent change in household, no, in the amount of single adult households in Europe. Right, we see a substantial increase where you just have a lot of single adult households now, and that's been growing with roughly 10% in the last 8 years. That's substantial. Um, if households are getting smaller, of course, these people are not going to leave the house, so you're not going to free up housing. And then second thing, and I think it's especially valid for new member states where we're seeing a lot of immigration happening right now. I would expect that a lot of migrants moving out of their home country are going to keep their home. First of all, they would maybe like to come back one day and have a house there. And second, you never know when the bottom is going to fall through and you might need to suddenly move back to your home country, and then it's nice to already have a home there. So these factors are probably going to contribute to having less housing available in depopulating areas than you would expect based on population decline alone. Uh, Another thing I would like to raise, and I think this was already raised a bit, housing ownership is probably going to complicate this matter. Um, the graph on the right shows a percentage of people living in a home, in an owned or a rented home. And there's lots of variation there. Unfortunately, couldn't break this up by different, by a smaller geography. So I have to do with this country total graph. For example, in Germany, a big part of the housing stock is rented out. And if you want to, if you have an area with population decline and a lot of the housing is rented out, I would expect that it's fairly easy to use that housing stock for tenants, because a professional landlord needs income. If people are moving out, he's going to lose his income, and he would be quite eager to get people to move into his home, even at a lower price. While if there's a lot of home ownership, like you have in Romania or Hungary, very extremely, these homeowners, especially if it's privates owning one home, they're probably not going to be very incentivized to invest in their homes because it's losing value anyway. They probably do not want to sell it because it has a bit of value for them, and the housing, well, the price they can get for the house is going to be quite low. And letting is, renting the house is going to be a bit of a fuss, right? There's always a bit of risk involved in renting out your property to somebody else because you don't know how you will find it again. So I think one of the things that we need to tackle there is especially in some of those countries where we have a lot of home ownership, is that we need to nudge those homeowners some way to let them provide their homes if they don't use it anymore. And then last thoughts, and then I'll shut up, promise. Yes, depopulation will free houses, above all in rural areas, and not as much as we think, but it will free houses and it will drop prices. One of the issues I can see is that homelessness, at least in my view, is a very urban issue, while depopulation is happening quite far away from cities. So that's something that we need to think about. And that means that providing homes in rural areas is going to be an attractive option to tackle specific homelessness issues. I don't think homelessness is a very homogeneous issue. You've got very different cases. And for some people, even a divorce, you need a place fast to get back on your feet. It might be a very attractive option to have a rural shelter for some time, some place to get to rest and have a roof above your head. In other cases, your typical rough sleepers, I doubt that they will be inclined to go 1.5 hours away from their beloved city just so they have a roof. I don't know. It's a more hypothesis than anything else. So thank you very much for listening. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this presentation. So I will, maybe we can stop for 5 minutes and ask participants to jump in with some questions. And I also would like to invite panelists to ask questions if you want to react. I'm thinking, Chloe, feel free to take the floor because you're working on this specific issue. So if you have questions for clarification to Chris, we do have a question from. I'll leave my colleague Anna to present the question. Go on.
Yes, there's one question from Anna who's asking if governments should maintain essential networks such as heating in all houses in shrinking towns and villages at any cost to maintain housing viable for renting.
So the question of access to services, Chris, have you done some research on this? And have you seen an evolution?
Well, it's a very good question, and yes, I've been working on access to service issues. Well, I would not know what the cost of maintaining those essential networks is. I do know that if you are a government and you are going to see both substantial decline in population all over the place, and you do see that these villages may provide a useful a useful shelter for the homeless, for example. What I think you can do is plan and appoint essentially places where you would want to keep those services running. Has two advantages if you do it, let's say, for specific communities. First of all, you have some sort of skill returns to skill, right? It's cheaper to provide services for multiple people than providing, let's say, a service to an entire village if there's only one people remaining or going to live there. And I think you can even do this quite affordably, but you have to, if population decline is going to be so substantial that essential networks are going to be under threat, I would definitely go and plan where you would still want to leave those services in place to provide as a sort of spillover for affordability and homelessness issues.
Okay. So we have another question, but before maybe I don't know if someone from Thessaloniki would like to respond to this question of service, or Thessaloniki is too big anyway to be challenged by the question of access to services. Panaji, Otis, would you like to comment on that?
Well, just a quick reaction, perhaps. I actually would have many questions for Chris, but I'm also aware of time. So, yeah, because I could think of parallels or of comparative between the examples from Spain and what I know from Greece. There is also a debate about counter-urbanization trends facing the crisis. But just to bring an insight from the city, which is not perhaps very well thought or informed, as a quick reaction to the question, there is an issue, I think, which also has to do with okay, that's perhaps two issues here at the same time. One is one relates to the geography of infrastructures, and the other to the social geography of the city. So I think this also resonates perhaps with what can't remember now the name, the first speaker.
Niklas from Germany.
Referring to the issue of relying on green means of transportation and so on. So distance, but also accessibility intersect and are influenced, I think, in this way. Where are services and other sort of infrastructure, amenities, and so on located in the city, and how do you get there? And that's the one thing. And whether the social map of the city, segregation, you know, there might be a way of inequalities being reflected upon where do you live. Might mean which group do you belong, what's your income, and so on. That's as a quick reaction. In that sense, we do have certain issues in the city, but yeah, not sure if.
Thank you. Yes, it's very useful. Thank you very much for your comment. We will give you back the floor later on to present your perspective from Thessaloniki. We have some more questions coming.
Yeah, I have one from Alice.
Yes, please.
Yes. Now with COVID, there's the opportunity to work remotely for a lot of persons. And so could this be an opportunity for some rural areas where there is a depopulation, but also could this eventually lead to inflating housing prices in those areas?
Yeah. I'll try and provide an answer. And it is a two-stage answer. Let me start from my personal experience. I live in a suburb 40 kilometers north of Amsterdam, which has always been a fairly deprived area. And recently housing prices have exploded here to the extent that the people in my street, welders, forklift drivers, they can't afford a house anymore if they would have to move. So this inflation of housing prices quite far away from cities is definitely happening, at least in the Netherlands. This is a bit of a particular case, maybe. Question is whether this is due to COVID or due to the fact that big cities in the Netherlands have become very unaffordable as it is. On COVID, we've seen indeed that people are moving away from cities again. Not sure if that's because cities are just becoming unaffordable or because let's say it's people are just making a choice to live a very different lifestyle. I'm a bit hesitant to say that this is going to be lasting because we have seen pandemics in Europe before, and all the other pandemics we've had before have not had a lasting impact on the depopulation of the countryside. It might have a effect for 5 or 10 years in the very long run. I don't believe very strongly that if the pandemic moves away, cities will have a different role there. Is this an opportunity for rural areas? Absolutely yes. Again, if it's lasting, I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of examples of rural areas that have started to mobilize and seize this opportunity, to be honest. But yeah, I try to always look at the long run personally, so I would not be the right person to ask that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Chris, for this. I mean, we see that there are some cities trying to seize the opportunity. I'm thinking more about the decrease in tourism and trying to get a hold of this. But you're right, we don't know about the long-term impact. Conrado, I see you are raising your hand. Would you like to take the floor to react? So
muchas gracias por la invitación. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you to all the panelists. Chris, very interesting what you have just presented, and I just support everything you just presented. I would like to go into more detail a little bit later. When I do my speech, I will focus on the situation in Madrid and in Spain. I don't know if this is something that only affects Spain or if it's affecting the whole of Europe, but it is true that with the pandemic, we see that the towns that are within an hour from the big cities have become more populated. They used to be second homes for the people, and now they have become their main homes. So we have seen a delocalization of the vulnerable families from the cities to those towns that are within an hour commute. So we're talking about areas that are beyond that, so an hour and a half or further away. And the towns that have less than 4,000 inhabitants is a category, and then we have a group of towns with less than 400 inhabitants. We have seen a relocation of vulnerable families, which is a win-win because we see a larger population. But the problem of the services is still there. Transport, healthcare, those are essential services in these towns. And unfortunately, their responsibilities that are shared between the municipalities, the regional level, and the national level lead to a lack of provision of services for these towns. For example, we have to create bus connections from the towns to the main city where there is a big hospital, a healthcare center, where you can carry out your administration duties. What we need is to establish a European directive, an agreement on a European level, so the EU focuses or leads this repopulation at rural level, which has shown some cases of success, to oblige the governments to commit, because depending on the political ideology of the main government with that in the municipality has negative consequences for those families who end up not having a home, and especially on the children, because children, what we see in during the pandemic is that vulnerable families with children end up being confined in areas that are very tightly populated, that lead to more diseases and school failure. So we have seen success stories when we have improved services in schooling services in towns, but then we have the problem of transport and healthcare. So I don't think this situation will be solved unless there is a directive from the European level to overcome the political interest of the governments, because sometimes if the main government has a political trend that is different from that of the municipality, well, we see a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Conrado. We're looking forward to hear more about your project later. We have a question from Donald McManus about successful example of rural settlement housing scheme. So yes, we have at least one. We will listen to the Foundation Madriana a bit later on, and Conrado and Josefina will present their program. But if there are other examples from panelists or participants, I think it would be very interesting to hear from you. Also a question from Daniel Fabregas. If I understand well, you're saying that one thing is the mobilization of vacant housing, but the other thing is to mobilize the community to be welcoming if you have a program of pre-settlement. So I think that's one of the challenge I would like to hear from the Fondation Madriana later on. How do you make sure that there is this welcoming feeling from the community and not in my backyard phenomenon? But we can maybe speak about that later on. So thank you very much, Chris. I think that was a great presentation. If you could send it to me, so I'll make it available to all participants.
Thank you. Yes.
If that's okay. Great. Thank you. As you said, we're a bit late, so I will just move now and give the floor to my colleague Chloé, who's a partnership officer working for FIANSA together with the Fondation Abbé Pierre. And at the moment, you're working in particular on this challenge of shrinking cities and territories in the EU and the impact it can have on housing. So, Chloé, we're listening to you.
Thank you, Clotilde. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's a real pleasure to have a proper discussion on opportunities in shrinking cities and depopulated rural areas. So I'm Chloé. I'm a project officer for FIANSA and Fondation Abbé Pierre. My main mission usually is to coordinate the annual overview of housing exclusion in Europe. And I also work temporarily on those papers from the Housing Solutions platform. And this paper that we are working on currently is not ready yet. So basically the discussions today are also here to feed into the report that we are drafting and to inspire and to have really interesting practices from all around Europe. So I'm just trying today to present you the first thoughts and the first highlights from this report that we are drafting. And we will then keep the discussions after this debate today, and we will keep you posted on the publication date, etc., which will be in the coming month. Yeah, basically, we chose to investigate housing solution in shrinking cities and depopulated areas for the reasons that we have mentioned already. Chris already had a very interesting introduction, and I think I will try not to repeat lots of things that has been already said. But maybe just to put two elements of context in perspective. So first of all, and we discussed it already, we touched upon it with the question of Alice, the impact of the pandemic on our relationships to our homes, our neighborhoods, our territories, and how we feel safe in places and how we feel connected to others, connected to the world, etc. And I think we collectively experienced a transformation with the pandemic and the COVID. With the need for space, the need for the harsh living conditions in cities during the lockdowns, for instance, and we see very recent trends, and this is not really yet backed by hard data, but apparently more and more people are looking for housing in medium and small-sized cities. And the second element of context, of course, is the rising housing exclusion and homelessness trends on increasingly closed and tensed housing markets. So maybe just I'm just taking out some data we had from our last housing exclusion report. This is this is not a scoop. Basically, we are facing a European-wide housing crisis for a decade now. We witness rising housing inequalities in big cities and in tense housing markets, with the widening housing costs gap between poor and non-poor households in the last 10 years in the European Union. So here you have a graph on the evolution of total housing costs in Europe. And as you can see, poor tenants spent on average more than 500 euro per month in housing costs in 2008 in the European Union, and it has been rising by 21% in 10 years. So this is really, I think, the reason why today is a very important topic, because we have to find affordable housing solutions for all. And we face these high pressured housing markets. So we have to find ways to house people who need homes. And we also have this quite shocking figures. This is not official data. This is an estimate we do with Fianza. We have today 700,000 people who are sleeping rough or in emergency accommodation or temporary accommodation on any one night in the European Union. And it's an increase of 70% in 10 years. So the needs are here. As you said, Chris, the profiles of homeless people are more and more diverse. So we face also very different situations. We have more and more family homelessness, children homelessness, youth homelessness. More and more migrants are overrepresented among homeless people too. So we have witnessed in the last 30, 40 years a diversification of profiles. So also a diversification of needs. And this has to be taken into account in in the solutions that we could provide then. So maybe just to have a little thinking about what is urban shrinkage. So here I'm stepping a bit aside the rural and depopulating question, which is a bit different, because when we started working on this topic, we also wanted to have a reflection on shrinking cities. So where the urban shrinkage spirals have been acting in the past years. And here it's a little scheme from Daniel Florentin, who is a researcher who worked a lot on urban shrinkage, especially in Germany. And it highlights the fact that the degrowth is an accumulation of processes and self-fueling spiral. So basically, you have the demographic spiral that we spoke about already. That leads to an urban shape spiral, urban wasteland, empty buildings, etc. You have the socio-economic spiral with mass unemployment, a system of productivity eroded, etc. And you have the public finances spiral with high debt or under supervision municipalities, etc. And of course, you have also a very important issue, the fact that services, public services are closing. And this is also a common issue for rural areas and towns that have been impacted by degrowth. The fact that metropolization, so what we spoke with Chris already, the fact that people are leaving rural areas for employment opportunities and education opportunities, etc. And we had witnessing this reinforcement of territorial inequalities in the last years. So maybe it's good to be now right in the core of the problem. So what are the key housing challenges in housing in shrinking contexts? First of all, we have this significant imbalance between the housing demand and offer, high vacancy rates, the deterioration of the built stock, and also quite important question of the unfit housing issues. Basically, if I take an example of a German city that have been impacted by shrinkage, Leipzig, you had, starting from the 90s, this post-industrial context, and the national government, German government, put in place a national policy to demolish big housing ensembles, etc., which was called Plattenbauten. And this was causing a new urban form. So now Leipzig is called the perforated city, with high rates, vacancy rates, and the multiplication of brownfields, etc. And you also witnessed the fact that some neighborhoods that were highly impacted by vacancy was also impoverished, because people, inhabitants with sufficient income, would move to more attractive parts of the city, and the parts that were like in this shrinking situation would get poorer and poorer with less and less services, etc. So also interesting to keep in mind that territorial inequalities are at different level, and including at city level. And here in Leipzig, you have neighborhoods where prices are getting higher and higher nowadays, and you have also neighborhoods where housing is very unfitted to people because you don't have money to do the renovation, etc., etc. And then, of course, the huge challenge of declining availability and access to public services. And this is a trend that we have seen in all around Europe. The fact that public services in those contexts were closed, public transport, closure of schools because less and less children are there and less young people are there, closure of nurseries, health services, etc. So you have this context of increasing inequalities in the access to basic services. So now, how do you turn disadvantage into opportunity? This is the key question of our discussion today. And we tried to have information from different local practices. So I will start with the good practices and I will finish with the challenges, because there are huge challenges in those contexts. But maybe just to start with continuing with the example of Leipzig, the fact that associations and the municipality have been proactive in finding ways to reuse, recycle, upgrade vacant buildings and wastelands. So you have the association Haushalten, who for 15 years now have been working on how to use empty buildings and put low-income people in there for a very low rent or for free rent. And the idea is to exchange rehabilitation works, or the fact that you will live in the building and you will improve it by living in it and doing works, etc. And they do a partnership with the owners, etc., to have these win-win situations where you can have a very low rent and do the works in the empty buildings. So they developed two different concepts. And you can, I will have proper details in the report later on. Now I'm just trying to have a broad view, but this is a very interesting example. And for instance, the municipality in 2015 passed a local decree to support alternative housing solutions. And it's been a long process, but now you see quite a lot of also cooperative housing initiatives, etc., with the idea of also doing the community and activities, etc. So it's a very interesting example. And then we have the example of repopulating abandoned towns and rural areas with people in housing needs. So we have today with us the Madrina Foundation, and I'm thankful for that, because this will be very interesting to learn about their practice and their experience. And we also, I think you heard, because it was very relayed in the media, the fact that some villages in Italy welcomed refugees and found housing solutions and employment opportunities some years ago. I saw that we had some questions about that, because of course you have this huge challenge of how do you convince local people and how do you create a welcoming context for those people. And the examples of Riace, Sutera in Italy, for instance, were quite striking, because the mayor at that time, who welcomed openly and who did a proper strategy to welcome people in the town, was then pursued by the justice when Matteo Salvini was in charge. And you had huge questions and huge debates and huge fights afterwards in those villages. And it became even, in Italy, it became even a flag for extreme right debates, etc., to say that the villages were replaced by people, etc. So you have this huge question of how do you make the links, how do you create the welcoming context, and how do you put everybody around the table, because this is important. You have to think about welcoming people, you have to think about keeping the people who are here and who are there in good context, etc. So this is a very, very complex question, but I'm sure with our friends from Madrina Foundation, we will have possibilities to discuss it a bit better. And from Greece also, I think we will have very interesting inputs afterwards. And I think what's very interesting with this topic is the fact that you have these challenged contexts where you can have creativity, local urban planning, enabling new practices and the renewal of public policies. So we have, in the report, we will also touch upon some practices that have been in the United States, for instance, smart shrinkage, right-sizing, creative decline, etc. So you have lots of literature and research on that point. And we also we'll try to go a bit beyond the housing issue and to talk about holistic and integrated approaches, including the improved access to services. So for instance, we will touch upon some practices in France on revitalizing vacant shops with inhabitants initiatives. I saw earlier that there was a question on services like energy, heating services, etc. And there is a very interesting example in Magdeburg in Germany, where the public services try to adapt the networks and the energy supply networks. And they basically put in place a solidarity fee between the different local authorities for water and the electricity supply. And it's a very interesting context to highlight here. And we have also an example in Vitry-le-François in France, where municipalities try to have a plan and a strategy on energy and social transition, etc. So these are contexts where you can find ways to think differently. And here you see a little picture of Detroit, which is, of course, the big example for these questions. You have then all the questions of the challenges and the watch points, because you don't want in those solutions to concentrate poverty, which is a very big issue. Because we could also argue, why should we put poor people in the places where, you know, it's a tricky question. So we have to be careful about that, and not to foster social isolation too, because when we speak about homelessness, for instance, we have people who can have high needs and specific needs. So we have to think about it. And the key here is to keep people's rights and choices and needs in the center of any solutions or strategy. These are long-term processes. We are specialists in all European countries to think about emergency solutions, especially for homeless people. We always have those winter plans that we then close and people are out again in the streets. So we have to think how to give a house to people in the long term. And this is what the right to housing is about. Yeah. And lastly, maybe just to do a link with the fact that the right to housing is also linked to the right to the city. And I think this topic is a great way to do the links between both. The idea here would be to plan with people who are already there, but also trying to welcome people who would need houses and homes. And what is the right of the city basically is to put inhabitants collectively in control over their home, their production and the use of urban space according to their needs and to their desires. And it's basically giving priority to housing value of use over market value. That was my first highlights for today. As I said, we will complete the report with our outputs today. So I'm very, very happy to welcome everybody and to be inspired by you all. And we aim a publication April 2021. So don't hesitate to contact me for any comments, exchanges, questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chloe. I wonder if there is a question, an urgent question. And if not, I would suggest we just move on already, because we're a bit late, but we will get back to you with question afterward. Is that okay, Chloe? Okay, thank you. So I will directly give the floor to the Foundation Madrina, because you can see there is a real appetite to hear about your concrete project of tapping on the opportunity of rural areas, depopulation for housing solution. So I will give the floor to Josefina, and you wanted to show a video. Thank you. It was okay, yeah.
Yes, sorry, I was mute. I just wanted to say thank you all for being here today. My name is Josefina Bengoechea Fernandez. I am a member of the Board of Trustees at Fundación Madrina, and it's a great honor to be here with all of you today to discuss one of our beautiful and sustainable projects in depopulated rural areas in Spain. A project where we have successfully relocated 300 families and 1,000 children, and for which I would like to share a video with all of you.
Actualmente, la crisis económica originada por la gestión sanitaria de la pandemia está provocando efectos secundarios muy graves en febrero de 2021. Se aprecia un aumento significativo y constante de las colas del hambre. La Fundación Madrina ha pasado de atender 400 familias al mes antes de la pandemia a entregar alimentación y higiene de bebé a más de 4.000 familias al día. Ha pasado de entregar 30 toneladas al trimestre antes de la pandemia a ofrecer más de 15 toneladas al día. Desastre humanitario. Cada vez más se ven familias españolas que no han podido aguantar por más tiempo el salvavidas que les ha prestado hasta ahora su propia familia o sus ahorros.
Bueno, desde hace 16 años Fundación Madrina tiene dos proyectos en pueblos que son Abuelos Madrina, que lo que hace es formar familia con abuelos que adoptan a una madre gestante o madre con hijo a cargo en los pueblos. Ellos adoptan, ellos dan amor, cariño, dan alojamiento, cosa que le falta a la madre gestante, que lo que da es acompañamiento, cuidado a estas familias. Y por otra parte, un proyecto precioso que es el de Pueblos Madrina, que es un proyecto en donde hemos realojado a cerca de 300 familias y 1.000 niños, y ahora con la pandemia pues se hace más que necesario, porque ahora son familias españolas con 7 hijos, 5 hijos, donde no pueden sobrevivir en las ciudades. La ciudad es una trampa mortal para todos ellos, porque no pueden, se han quedado sin trabajo, son familias de nueva pobreza, se han quedado sin trabajo debido a la pandemia, se han quedado sin poder pagar alquileres, se quedan sin hogar, y como esta familia, muchos de ellos viven hacinados, conviven con familiares. Normalmente, en este caso, vivían con la abuela que con 400 euros mantenía a 9 personas, 9 miembros, mantenían a los hijos y a los nietos, es decir, malvivían. Estaban hacinados, muchos de estos niños tienen fracaso escolar, estrés, se les cae el pelo, porque no son capaces de convivir con esta situación de extrema necesidad. Y cuando vienen aquí a los pueblos, que es una segunda oportunidad para ellos, una oportunidad maravillosa, una esperanza para ellos, pues resulta que empiezan a disfrutar, a ser felices. Ellos ahorita que son felices, se les quita todas las patologías, todas las enfermedades, dejan de caerse el pelo y sobre todo llegan a tener 10 en los sobresalientes en la escuela. En este momento todos los niños son felices. Los padres nos dicen que como ellos son felices, como ven a los niños felices, ellos son felices. Ellos van a dar vida al pueblo con todos esos niños. Este pueblo iba a cerrar la escuela porque les quedaba ya 2 alumnos, y gracias a que hemos traído 2 familias, uno de 4 hijos y otra de 7 hijos, más uno 8 que van a hacer, pues están pensando de cerrar la escuela a tener 2 aulas. Con lo cual damos vida al pueblo, están felices, el alcalde nos recibe, la maestra nos recibe con los brazos abiertos, el pueblo, todos ancianos, que ya es un pueblo envejecido, lo recibe a estos niños con los brazos abiertos, con el corazón grande. Y esta familia es la primera vez que tiene un hogar, con 7 hijos es la primera vez que tienen un hogar. Y se han encontrado con que esto es el sueño de su vida, se han encontrado con este pueblo que les ha acogido, donde van a empezar una nueva vida, van a empezar para siempre esa vida. Y lo primero que han hecho los niños es, hay animales, hay vegetación, hay montaña. ¡Qué maravilla! Qué mal debemos estar haciéndolo en las ciudades, cuando las ciudades se están convirtiendo en una trampa mortal para familias con hijos, con esa pobreza materno-infantil, con esa pobreza infantil. Y sin embargo, los pueblos se están abriendo a toda esta pobreza infantil para darles esa riqueza. Ellos dan esa riqueza a los pueblos, esa vida a los pueblos, y por otra parte los pueblos les regalan a estas familias con un hogar y con un trabajo. Damos gracias a estos pueblos y todos los pueblos que se abran a nuestras familias, porque gracias a esas familias van a poder dar vida a esos pueblos, dar alojamiento también. Yo animo a todos los pueblos de España que se abran a este proyecto de Pueblos Madrina, porque es una esperanza, es una oportunidad para este pueblo, porque dan vida, estas familias dan vida a esos pueblos. Se mueren de frío en las ciudades porque no pueden pagar tampoco la luz ni el agua. Y esa situación de calle que les puede obligar incluso a que servicios sociales les retiren los niños. Esos niños van a producir, dar vida en estos pueblos, cuando en otras condiciones servicios sociales se los quedarían y desgraciadamente no podrían dar esa vida. Muchísimas gracias a este pueblo, al alcalde, a la maestra, a todos los pueblos que se están abriendo a este proyecto, porque verdaderamente es un proyecto de vida, es un proyecto de amor. Muchas gracias.
And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our president, Conrado Jiménez.
Buenos días a todos.
Good
Gracias.
morning. Thanks, Josefina. Thanks, Chloe. Thanks to all the speakers. I am learning a lot today, but I am a molecular biologist. I was working at the center in Madrid, but afterwards I was working at a bank with two presidents at the capital market. But then I had a terrible accident 20 years ago. And at that point, I left everything and I started to work for the most important family company that we have, that is the family. And the most important person in that family is always the mother. And that's why today I am working for the mothers. I am the founder and I am working in this very important company. And we need to work with mothers, with the CEO. We need to empower them and we need to help them. For 20 years now, we are working for children and women and mothers that are more vulnerable in Spain and in Latin America, but also in other parts of the world. We have 78 nationalities. We are working with mothers coming from 78 different countries. And we have different kind of services. I am doing this introduction to introduce this foundation. We have a bank of food. Is the only bank that we have in Spain for children. We give milk, nappies, and food for babies, basic food for babies. And we didn't talk about children during the pandemic, and they are at risk. We are fighting against this children poverty, and with these children we have mothers, and we need to support them. They will be whatever the mother is. We have different activities in Cañada Real, in different poor areas. In Madrid, we are working with them, and the foundation is, before the pandemic, was working with 60% of vulnerable families in Spain and Madrid, and almost 90% at certain points. And what we were saying on the film, we are now working with 40,000 families per day. And in these 20 years, 2 million children we've been working with. Therefore, the foundation, it is a biosphere reserve that is protecting two species that are children and very brave mothers that are in a poverty situation. Therefore, we have healthcare. Also, we have flats for teenager mothers. The youngest one was 11 years old and 12 years old from Spain. You see the problem that they are facing when they are adolescents. And this is another debate that I can explain to you, because there is, when they don't have a family, these youngsters, they want to create a family that they didn't have. They want to love and to give love. And even if we are at cities, there is a lot of isolation, lots of autism. Before, you were talking about houses and flats that we have one person living at different flats. And we also have a call center that has received 250,000 calls, 1,500 volunteers. We've given food and shelter to all the families that needed it in Madrid and in different areas in Spain. From the social services, Red Cross, Caritas, and other organizations, they call us when they have families that they have that need help. And this family that we have seen in the film, we started this project. We have two projects for towns. We have a grandfather's madrina for women that have two main problems, and we give one solution. They create a family. They get grandfathers that have love and have a house, and these are women that are alone, but they can take care of them. We've been organizing this for 16 years now, and the Madrinas towns, we started a few years later. Before the pandemic, we had families that were immigrants, most of them, and families that maybe were for 4 or 5 years living at towns that where they had relocated, and they have a very good situation. They are integrated. The pandemic has changed the situation, and today we have a completely different situation. Before, I was saying that we had the first ones to move to the towns were rich families, people that had money and that went to live to towns that were close to the cities, and they have moved there during the pandemic. And therefore, our strategy to relocate poverty from urban areas to rural areas, our strategy had to stop, and therefore we need to go to areas that were far from the cities. We are in rural areas, people with towns with less than 400 inhabitants, that they towns where there were no children. And therefore we decided to bring together these two problems and to give one solution. We are working with 500 families. We have 500 families that are waiting to be relocated. And every day we get 1 or 2 or 10 families. But we have a new poverty due to the pandemic. The bad management that we had during the pandemic has created a new poverty. Families that before were in a normal situation, they had a job, they had a house, a rented apartment, and now because of the pandemic, they have lost the job. We have many restaurants, we live from tourism in Spain, and they don't have a job any longer. And we have also Spanish families in that situation. 50% of the people that are working with us that are asking for these homes are Spanish families, such as this one with 7 children. They are expecting another one, and they had a job before that they don't have it anymore. And they don't have money. They are not going to receive social grants because the system in Spain doesn't take into account reality.
Implementados estas ayudas sociales. El ingreso mínimo vital, lo que se llama el ingreso mínimo, está, ¿por qué? Porque no han considerado
what we call the minimal vital income. It's not set up properly because they didn't consider that during the pandemic, people are not able to pay their rents, also because most of these people have illegal working situations and therefore they don't have a contract. A lot of these families in a vulnerable situation went to live with their grandparents or with other families or to towns if they had a townhouse. But other families don't have these possibilities, so they're sleeping in bus stations and their cars. The police are calling me saying, we found a family living on the street. We have children living on the street. What should we do with them? Social services are saying, what can we do with these children? Are you going to take care of them? Can we take care of them? Their families who have lost their jobs are not going to receive social aid because they consider that they did have a job before the pandemic and therefore they are not liable to receive social benefits. And those who end up paying the highest cost are the children. Why? Because now in the cities, we see that the house owners, they they are not even accepting, they're not renting out to families with children, mothers who are pregnant, single mothers who are pregnant, and animals. So who's paying the cost of all of this? It is the children. So, and this is a problem that's not going to be solved after the pandemic. This is a problem that that is can only be solved with employment. And since we don't see any positive perspectives of employment growth, we this this is going to take a while because the pandemic is going to have a economic consequence for at least 7 years or more. So 50% of the families in vulnerable situation are very quickly in the coming months are going to lose their homes. Solution? Well, for the past 16 years, we've been trying to find a solution, working on the solution. So now we need to pick up our game. We have to involve the town mayors that call us and we call them. And we have what we call the pioneer godmothers, and they work as volunteers and they support these families. They're present in different municipalities. They try to identify what towns could be used, and we're really working with teachers. Teachers are often women, and this is very important. And women have to lead this initiative because men, well, we're not as efficient. I consider I'm not as efficient. I think that these big CEOs, the biggest CEOs in the world are not CEOs in companies. They're the CEOs of the families, the mothers, the women. And these women can identify teachers, and these teachers are helping us to identify towns where we can relocate families gradually. And we always relocate 2 families at a time so that they don't feel alone. And we relocate them to a small town like this town of Berrocal, where we put these 2 families in the town of Berrocal because it used to be a rich town that had a lot of farming, but due to the industrial changes, they weren't as relevant, and they were going to close down the school because they didn't have any children left. The municipal police also helps us. They help us to distribute food packages, and they're also identifying possible towns where we can relocate families. And in the next 7 years, we're going to see an exodus of families in vulnerable situations to towns. And this is the only option for survival for these families because the cities are becoming mortal traps for families with children that are in schooling age and under 3 years old and unemployed. This is the only solution. There's no possibility for them to live in the cities. I talk with the city halls, in, and it's unbelievable to see that they can't access homes because we see that sometimes we relocate one family, but then there are no more options, and then we can't help other families. So this seems like the only solution. It's also a win-win solution because it's not only positive for the family, but it's also good for the towns that have a new life source, not only for that town, but also for the towns around that town where we're relocating the families. For example, pharmacies can open, or healthcare centers, or transport for example, school buses to take the children to the schools. So this is a solution for families who have children who are underage, who are going to school, and it's also positive for the towns. When we arrive to these towns with a bus full of children, you can see the old men and women holding their walking sticks, and they're cheering us on. Yay, you're bringing all the children new life. And they tell us, you are bringing us life. It's as if we had won the lottery, and it's amazing. It's really touches your heart. And we see families like this one with 7 children who were going to be on the street. They had no other way out, and the pandemic has led to families to living together with other generations, with other families, living in places where underground without any light, where we have 5 people living in the same room. And at the end, it's the children who suffer the most from this situation. And they even, their hair falls out. We've seen this especially in teenage girls. It seems that they're more sensible. They end up developing health issues and school failure. And when we move them, we relocate them to the towns, this changes radically. Mom, I saw a cow, I saw a horse, I can run around, they're in the nature, and all of their health issues, all of their worries disappear. Stress just disappears. And they express how happy they are, and we see that they're getting straight A's. They're getting very good grades. We also give the local teachers support with curriculums, with books, with financial aid. So we're taking more steps. We even want to work with the local universities, even trying to establish contracts between different parties, the family, the local administration, the educational system, so that we can really involve them. And we're not only providing homes, we give them homes. We identify how many homes are owned by the municipality, and through this contract, we could provide these homes to the people, the families in need. Also, we're trying to, now in the case of Mili and Fatima, we even obtained a job for one of the mothers the day after moving to the town. So you have to remember that in big cities, it's hard to access jobs because a lot of people want that job, but in towns, sometimes they just don't have people to cover that need. And often the families can get a job the day after they arrive. So we're working with different sectors, with universities, with engineers for planning, specialists in forestry. We try to involve all the relevant actors. And this is also for the representative of the European Commission. We have some towns that lived off of tourism, and now they don't have any tourism. They're in a poverty situation. They have to become self-sustainable. They have to be more autonomous. There's no hope for tourism right now, and it's not going to recover in the next 7 years. Forget about it. I used to be a guru in this subject. They used to call me JP Morgan. And in fact, Josefina used to work at JP Morgan. And I get calls from stock market offices to ask me what I think is going to be the evolution of the stock market. So I do have a good vision of the future of the economic evolution. And frankly, it's going to take at least 7 years. And usually economic cycles last about 14 years. And this is going to be at least half of an economic cycle. But I'm hoping that with all the investments and all the initiatives, it won't last 14 years, only half of that. But the governments are providing social aid, but they shouldn't be focusing on giving the people the fish, but teaching them how to fish, stimulating employment. So we have to do everything we can to put an end to this situation. And I think this initiative of Pueblo Madrina, Madrina Towns, we have 15 initiatives and 27 activities to develop, to give a real boost to this initiative. We also want to ask for a universal right to be registered, because not only do you need a document, you also need to be registered, registered in the local municipality. So you need to have this document where it states that you are registered in this home, in this town, to have an access to all the other services. Right now, there's a black market for this, to register where you live, and it costs 300 euros. And unfortunately, this vulnerable sector of the population, especially pregnant mothers, they are not being registered. And there are families where the grandparents have to take in with their very tiny pension the whole family. So they're providing for their children and their grandchildren, maybe 20 people with their very small pension. So if there is a social aid within the family, it has to provide for everybody, because once the family has one aid, they don't receive anything else.
Thank you.
And we want to ask for more solutions. I don't know if this is a situation in Italy, but in Spain, we have a situation where it's, despite being the same country, when we change from one region to the next one, you lose your rights. You lose your right to healthcare. We have children where when they have been relocated, they don't have babies. They don't have the right to receive social health care because they're not registered. And with the pandemic, people are working online, and therefore they're not working as quickly. And sometimes it takes 6 months for these people, these babies, to get registered, to get the documents they need, and they don't have access to healthcare. There are families that wait 6 months 6 months to get the documents so they have the right to unemployment benefits. I don't know if this only affects Spain, but I think this is really a crime against humanity from the public authorities. 50%
you.
of poverty comes from this. And I
Thank you.
want to be clear, and we've calculated this number.
2 minutes.
So the right to be registered is essential because in Spain, when you go from one region to one community, autonomous community to the other one, you lose your rights. And this creates ghettos, poverty ghettos. We have areas in Madrid where the families are afraid of moving to somewhere else because they would lose all their benefits. So what we want to do is what we are doing, what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that we're concentrating all these families in ghettos of poverty. So we have to guarantee rights that can be transferred from one community to the next. And we could extend this project of Madina Foundation to the whole of Europe. So go to other countries even.
Thank you,
And vice
Conrado.
versa, not only moving people from Spain outwards, but inwards too. You were asking me before how we are able to to have the town be open and have an open mindset to our projects. So we often work with the town mayors. We ask for voluntary families that can help these families, and we try to get jobs for these new families. So we do involve the mayor, and we try to make these towns as open, as welcoming as possible for these new families. Also, we work a lot with the teachers. The teachers are like the welcome party. So we really work with them, making sure that the families feel welcome. As a conclusion, I want to say that the the lines where we give out food packages are becoming longer and longer, and we're seeing that there are more and more families that don't have homes, not only for the adults but also for children, and we have to relocate these people towards rural areas, and we have to do this in a smart way. We have to make sure that these towns are also self-sufficient, creating a system that can guarantee a circular economy in that town, in that small region. Maybe uniting or creating a circular economy amongst some of the small towns in the area. So having said this, well, if you have any questions, ask me. We have a lot of experiences, and most of them have been successful, and frankly, it's been a blessing for us. The main issue we do see when relocating these families are, unfortunately, the administration. It's better when the state doesn't intervene. When social services don't intervene. I've taken a family to Guadalajara with newborn twins, and the administration said, we cannot help you for the next 3 years because the social law that is implemented here is that you have to have been registered here for 3 years before we can give you social aid. What? This is absurd. The main hinder we find are the laws, the system. And frankly, I can I can work with the administration to develop a strategy that will make the rural repopulation successful. Otherwise, it could be a failure. Thank you very much. I'm at your disposal if you have any questions. Thank you for inviting me. It's really a project of love towards maternity, towards the children. Something we have learned is that to give life, you have to give your life. And here we are 24 hours a day supporting mothers in any situation. And frankly, this project that we've been developing for years now and that has now exploded, unfortunately, due to the growing need, need that I foresee will continue growing, has also given me so much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much, Conrado.
I always say
Thank
that
you.
every child that is born comes with a message, and that is that God still hasn't given up hope in humanity. So every child that is born, God says, okay, I still have a little bit of hope for you. I think you still have some good in you. You will be able to regenerate life in the world, in this case, through the repopulation of towns. Now, we're not seeing a industrial revolution, but a rural revolution. We have to get on this train of rural revolution and help all these families to
Thank you
move
very
forward, to
much.
have a future.
Thank you, Conrado. I'm sorry to have to try to interrupt you. It's great to hear about this project and to hear how passionate you are. It's just that I have time. We have a few minutes left to ask you many questions actually, and then to hear from Greece. So I will just summarize some of the questions we have received, and then I'll ask you to respond quickly. So we have time to also listen from the experience of Thessaloniki. Two main questions, I think.
Prometido. Prometido.
No. Two main questions that came.
I promise I'll be brief.
Employment. I mean, yes, of course, employment is the best solution rather than social help. But how can you find employment for those families when we know depopulation is also linked with economic shrinkage? So, can you find employment for them and how? Second question is your project is really good for families, but do you also host rough sleepers? So maybe people who don't have a family, the more traditional rough sleeping homeless people profile. So employment, rough sleeper, and maybe one question from me. How do you find the towns? Do you have enough municipalities interested, or do you have too many? Well, yeah, I would be interested to hear about that. Thank you.
Sí. Empiezo por la última.
I'll start with the last question. We have those pioneer godmothers that identify towns who could be potentially interested, and once we have a group of towns that are interested, we speak with the local city councils and with the citizens of those communities to arrive to an agreement and also to disseminate information about our initiative, and then those municipalities can identify how many homes are empty or available. There are a lot of private homes that are empty, where the owners have not been to for years. And if we could include these homes, well, we could extend our projects a lot more, but these are private owned homes, so we can't really force them. We are trying to involve the town mayors so they can help us identify the homes that are available. So we have the pioneer godmothers, the mayors of the towns, and then we also have we would also like to involve private owners that have maybe own houses in the towns, but they're not using it. So that's the work that we're carrying out now. We're working in Valle de Angres, in Sierra de Gredos. I welcome you to come here to eat the best jamón serrano and the best meat we have. And frankly, the best fish I've ever had, ironically, is in the mountainous area. So you're all welcome. Chris, Chloe, our friends from Greece. So I'll welcome you to come over here. You're going to love it here. The food is amazing. The snow on the top of the mountains. We're also trying to identify how we can work in a very specific way per town. We had a town called Barrocal that was very interesting because they have a lot of fruit trees and they also produce a very specific bean, and those are also delicious. I would also like to invite you to have a bite of these.
Es verdad que estamos en otras partes de España, pero bueno.
It is true that we are also working in other areas of Spain. So we are together, working together with the teacher, the mayor, the different people there to get a job. And what we are doing now is to set a protocol with different authorities, and we are getting help from the universities, and we will try to analyze the situation in every town, in every region, to find jobs in those areas, to go back to agriculture, because the newcomers, they are ready to work there, to work to work on agriculture. We want the bar, we want the shop of the town to open again, and the bar. And it is also very important. The other day I was with a very nice mayor who had a sheep, and it was very nice to be there. And he was telling me that the population that he has are 90 years old. They are very old. And therefore, taking care of old people also, this is a job that can be created there. We are also taking into account to have new textile factories, and instead of having factories in Morocco or in China, maybe we can produce in these areas. Therefore, the job plan or the work plan is very important when we need to develop this in those areas, because it is competitive. A family who has 3-4 children with 300 euros, they are able to survive. In a city, it is impossible to live. And what was the second question?
Rough sleepers, do you also use your program to relocate people who don't have a family, who are maybe single man?
Sí. Sí. Vale, las familias sin techo o las
These
personas...
families and people that are in that situation is more complicated. We have many young people and old people that are sleeping outside because they are waiting to, and they are going to be there for a long time. These homeless people, they might have more resources because they are just one person. We are only working with families. The Madrena Foundation is only working with families, with children and mothers, but we are coordinating with different institutions to find a roof for them. But it's easier. We have had fathers with children too that wanted to go to a town. It is more complicated, but we can do it. And we have two situations where we are considering this, but yes, it could be done.
Thank you very much, Conrado. I only regret I didn't plan more time so we could hear more about your project, but I know Chloe will keep in touch with your organization, and maybe we can get back to you. Thank you so much, Josefina y Conrado. We just had a comment also from Veronica Perez Calzado, who saying that they are trying to implement a similar project in Galicia, with some pilot projects with municipalities. I don't know if you know about it or if that's interesting for you. I will give the floor to Panagiotis.
Hay una iniciativa, sí.
Yes, please, Conrado.
Hay una cosa interesante sobre Galicia.
Yes, there is something interesting on Galicia. Is the president of the community has said something very interesting. All these families that want to go to Galicia, the community, the region, I don't know, Veronica, whether this is true, the community is giving them land to cultivate it for farming. And I think this is very interesting. I mean, that is what we are trying to do, and I think we will be able to do it in Avila too.
Okay, thank you.
Is as it was in the past. When you are a colon, you get there and you get the land to be successful.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. Panagiotis, thank you for being with us as well. You represent the municipality of Thessaloniki in Greece, and you have a presentation to present your perspective on shrinking cities and the potential for housing. But also, please feel free to react to the previous presentation if you have some comments. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation, Clotilde, and thanks also to Josefina and to Chloe, with whom we had a small exchange and discussing also the topic, because we were wondering on how what we have to reflect on, the insights we have to bring from Thessaloniki may fit in the topic of the panel. It's been very inspiring. Apart from interesting hearing Conrado. So I kind of go one step back, because we have not, I don't have to present actually solutions, but only what led to the beginning of planning and designing. And I'm not perhaps the one most suitable to speak about the practicalities of this, even at the stage of planning. But I can tell you a bit about how we've got there, because I'll be the only speaker. I'll try to push it a little bit, what I've prepared, but being conscious of time, but please do let me know when we exceed the limits, so to speak. But this is the outcome of a joint work and a joint idea that came from my colleague Merichos Günes, who works for the major development agency in Thessaloniki, and who have been our partners of a team that I sort of led, but comprising of another 12 people at the local university and the School of Spatial Planning and Development, but also that of architecture, which so we are just finished a quite big study done in a very short period of time, bigger in detail, that is. And I'll bring you some insights from this, trying to frame them within the title of the panel, the title of the session. That is, how can we think of shrinking cities, and whether, in the case of Thessaloniki is a shrinking city, and does this frames also the potential opportunities for affordable housing in a city and for responding to homelessness, but also other aspects of housing difficulties and precarity for a wider sort of population groups. It may resonate, it may bring in mind some of the topics, some of the issues more or less better touched upon by Chris in the beginning, but I have to say that it fits better to the more background introductory info given to us by Chloe. I felt that it would really sort of be, in a sense, part of it, or at least an example of some aspects of what Chloe has been talking about in the case of the city. And what I'm going to do is highlight the issues, give a bit of context, highlight the issues that I think frame Thessaloniki as from a shrinking city's perspective, and then close this by give you a few snapshots from the study, and then close this by opening up very generally, very briefly, the sort of directions that where kind of this research is leading the municipality, the development agency, and so on. So I'm not speaking personally on behalf of the municipality, rather, but as a researcher in this case. Maybe just skip some of the background information I probably have prepared to tell you. And but just let me give you some of the challenges we faced. First, in beginning a study about which needed to conclude in informing and coming up with suggestions for the planning of affordable housing in Thessaloniki. And the how do we start question had at least to do with at least three aspects, three dimensions. What space for housing policies developed at an urban metropolitan level, or perhaps housing policies in Greece in general, in a country of homeowners with 3/4 to 80% of the population estimated living in their own homes, even if we don't have the accurate data, but even if there are indications that this may have started to kind of change. The second similar challenge was how to build affordable housing policies in a context with no housing policy. And this is probably an exaggeration, but about 10 years ago, the only, and with a very minor role these years, but the only public housing production body had been sort of dissolved. And for almost 5 years, there was no, literally speaking, or the very bits and pieces of basically benefit type policies, not a coherent policy framework, social housing policy framework. And the third challenge has been how to speak about housing affordability locally or in the country, but especially locally, when we don't know what we mean, when we don't have a common language, a common framework of understanding. It was a challenge for the research team itself, but also between us academics and researchers and our colleagues in the development agency and the municipality. Beginning the study, there had also been some challenges. Some of them had to do with a series of urban transformations that have been in place perhaps in the 2-3 last decades or so. I'm going to very briefly refer to them and then give you some examples under the frame of shrinking cities, and trying to catch some of the detail of my notes in order to save some time. One is that, yes, Greece and Thessaloniki is a society of homeowners, but this is under transformation, as I said before, and this is due to a series of societal developments and market trends, which I'm going to specify indicatively below. Another thing is that we're coming out of a decade of crisis, and in a sense, a situation going from crisis to crisis, as in many other places in Europe and beyond, obviously, because from the kind of debt crisis and austerity at the beginnings of past decade, late 2000s, and so on, and how this experienced in Greece as a whole and locally, to the so-called refugee crisis and the influx of new populations after a time that Thessaloniki was among the places to lose population of people migrating, as Chris has noted, but also Chloe in other contexts in rural areas, but mostly abroad in the search of employment, in a trend of brain drain, as it has been framed in local discourses, but also with migrants from the 90s and 2000s migrating elsewhere, remigrating or returning back to Albania, Bulgaria, or elsewhere. So we had all these combined trends, and then at a certain point in time, in the middle of the past decade, you have Thessaloniki being partly center stage again, next to after Athens perhaps, with respect to hosting quite significant numbers of asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees. And then there is COVID. I don't have much to say because our study was kind of unfolded within this period. We actually started the research during the spring lockdown, but still there are big question marks. Some of you have already commented on some of them. The big question marks are, where does this take us? How we, just referring to something I've noted from close presentations on what's the impact? How do we change our relationship to our homes, but also what are the potential market impacts and reshufflings? What will be the impact on prices, rents, and on rising needs, and so on. There's been also decades of shrinking supply and growing demand especially for demand for rental homes. And I'll give you an example of that shortly after. There have been new market pressures, indications for the time being quite small, but in terms of impact, but with a potential of rapid growth of a revived investment interest in real estate in the city. And the kind of showcase of it, which with a small perhaps, but with some impact, have been that of the rise of short lettings and the Airbnb. And I'll give you again some indication of it later on. And an overall trend of rising trends, rising prices, and especially rising rates, proportionally more than sales for the time being, at least, in a very short period of time. We're talking after more than half of a decade that property prices and rents were following a downward scale. And again, you're going to see it on a graph later on. And then again, there's a fluidity, and we can't speak perhaps of a definite situation, but there is also indications of emerging trends of shifting geographies related to, let's say, rising prices due to the spread of the Airbnb and short lettings, for instance, in the center of the city, though, in the historic part. So indication of gentrification, of trends of reshuffling, new patterns of segregation that we don't know exactly where are they getting us. And then there is COVID, the lockdown, and some of these are frozen while new challenges are ahead. And to begin with, we started on that with a knowledge gap. We had no academic publications, no previous studies, especially in the city, because the housing issue was not an issue, or not thought to be an issue, for at least 20 to 30 years until very, very recently. So let me make this a bit more concrete with skipping a little bit of the detail and giving you some examples. Just indicative, this is from the EU data, showing the past decades, basically, how tenants, but also those who are given free accommodation, who are hosted as a category, let's say, have been growing on, facing more shares, are facing more difficulties related to housing. That's the first one. Sorry for the Greek there, but this was really a last moment addition and did not have the time to adapt. Then again, referring to some of the data, that's the national picture, yeah, to some of the data Chloe has presented. This one over here, the top right one, you can see the differences between poor and non-poor population, but also showing the rising share of households who are facing an overburden of housing costs. Again, similar graph showing the rise of overcrowding and the trend with households facing difficulties in terms of payments, paying costs and bills and so on related to housing. And this is again just only indicative. The red line is what you need to know, and it gives you an idea of how the mortgages that cannot be sort of paid back. I'm losing a word here, but excuse me about that. As a percentage of the total mortgage, or the total mortgage in the sort of value. Yeah, and you can see that this kind of what remained a small thing in Greece raised after the crisis, and especially after other economic indicators, let's say, started getting better. But this is only indicative. Let me try to. Do I have another 5-6 minutes, or is it already?
Let's say, I mean, we still have a conclusion, and I was hoping we would have Q&A. And I am very aware that we have 2 interpreters that wanted to finish at 12. So maybe 2 minutes?
Okay,
2
minutes.
minutes. Thank you.
Okay, very briefly, just to introduce the point, the logic of why to present in such a panel and how this relates to the topic and some of the other presentations. What is shrinking if we are to frame Thessaloniki as a shrinking city? A shrinking local economy, shrinking population, shrinking housing stock, and shrinking affordability, housing affordability. Thessaloniki has a history of deindustrialization back in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, but also high unemployment rates and relatively high even before the recent crisis. For the shrinking population, I'll show you some data. We have basically a reshuffling of the. This is too much for perhaps for you, but what it shows is that let's say the second line here is the Thessaloniki municipality. Here you can see the change, population change, in the last 3 decades or so, more or less, okay, because that's official data from the states and the shops. Lost about 1/4 of its population, and there's been a reshuffling because many people moved outside the city. But there is an impact there, a complication, which, so what sort of shrinking? What is the scale or the level of shrinking? I'm putting this in question marks because this is, the argument is that yes, there are things and elements of shrinking, but it depends on where to look. It's not the metropolitan area perhaps, but specific areas within the city may have issues, and may these issues coincide with trends in urban economic social geography and segregation. Like you can see in those maps of the city showing different indicators. For instance, let's say people without primary education here and people with tertiary education there, one of the two at least, where you can see a clear division as an indicator of modest in terms of other European cities perhaps, but definitely segregation, local patterns of segregation. To cut a long story short, I'm going straight to the data. In terms of, as an example of a shrinking housing stock, this shows basically the decline in construction. New issues for constructions, the new building size, and so on. You can see the downward scale. You can see the impact of the past decade. But what we came across in the city itself is that we kind of try to approach the question of empty homes, and there we can see a trend of a growing number over the decades. Diversification, multiplication of the areas in the city where these are to be found, and a number, an abandoned, let's say, or empty stock, which we're not aware of being of this size and dispersion, and that's the municipality only, as an example. This is the sort of graph referring to the shrinking housing affordability, just as an indication of market prices for rents. The darker line refers to the municipality, peripheral municipalities for the one, the bit lighter line, where you can see that we already, in a very short period of time, went to more than, the levels just at the start of the crisis, at the start of the past decade. and this is the extent, the rise of short lettings from the Airbnb platform, though within most of which are entire properties, but overwhelmingly concentrated in the central municipality, and again with a high share in the center of the city, indicative of the gentrification trends I was telling before. So, in lieu of the conclusion and having to rush a little bit, coming back to the challenges of planning for affordable housing, where do we start from? Two sort of steps. One is feeding the debate. We sort of examined some of the good practices. I mean, and again, I'll refer to Chloe's presentation, which we're really curious to learn more about those examples that you quoted. But from the frame of what can be applied locally in terms of the local conditions, the legal framework, the system of governance, and market trends, but also needs. Reflecting on the data, what data we need and what do we have, and how can we access proper data. Define affordability in the local context and reframe the discourse. Intervene in this, start by this, and build a common lexicon of what is affordable housing. What do we mean by housing need in the city or housing precarity? I'm not moving into details of the plan, but this is only indicative of where can the local authorities can start from something which may take the form of a social rental agency, but in a wider, dispersed, perhaps also consultative governance framework in a context of local synergy with third sector and other partners, to use the dispersed and small property ownership that is characteristic of the city, and try to focus on the empty homes that we kind of were surprised to find, to learn about their extent and stock. So, with many apologies for rushing a little bit and for spending more on introduction rather than the details, and many thanks for the invitation and taking the opportunity. Feedback and questions would be welcome. Feedback more, perhaps, and comments would be very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Panagiotis, for this very interesting presentation. So I'm very sorry that we won't have time for questions. And also, I was hoping to give the floor to a researcher, Nikolaos Vrantis, who has worked on a very interesting project in Greece as well, with the municipality of Naoussa in northern rural Greece, where there was a population of 200 asylum seekers that were relocated in 2019 into hotels. And he was saying that the challenge here was really the welcome from the community, and he would have liked us to discuss this. But maybe we can take this debate further in the future. So I noted a few points to summarize the debate, but I will let Sarah Koupchou from the Fondation Abbé Pierre to conclude. But before I do so, just 2 points. First, someone is asking if Panagiotis, you could please provide a link to your report, and if you could also send us a presentation so that we can have more time to look at the data and maybe get back to you with questions in writing. Then, is that okay?
Yeah, sure. The link to the report, you'll have to wait a little bit because we're in the process of turning it into an accessible format and translating in English in the next couple of months or so, hopefully. But the presentation, I can send it to you, yeah, right, later today, perhaps.
Great.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Thank you. And I will make a recording of the event available together with the speaker presentation. So just for takeaway from the debate for me was the question of vacant housing and how can we mobilize private rental sector through examples like social rental agencies that you just mentioned, or through projects like the Madriena Foundation. One point we didn't have time to speak about enough was the community. How can we ensure this kind of project work hand in hand with the community so that there is not a not in my backyard phenomenon, particularly if the project address homeless migrants and refugees maybe. The question of employment, of course, at the core of it, how can we ensure projects like the one from the Madriena Foundation go hand in hand with the local community so that there is employment opportunities and it's not only about relocation. And then the question of services that Chloe, you particularly touched upon, and transportation, of course, being a key. One gap I saw in the debate, we didn't speak about how technology can change things. I mean, Chris, you said there had been pandemic in the past and it didn't change people moving on to the cities, but the difference today is technology. So maybe that's something we could look toward in the future. That's it for me. I want to say a big thank you to all the speakers and to the interpreters for your time and being with us now. And I will hand over to Sarah Kupchou from the Fondation Abbé Pierre to conclude. Thank you so much to participants and speakers. Bye.
Thank you, Chloe, and sorry for my light. It's not very good. I hope it will be good. I will be really brief because I think we are a little late. So thank you very much, all of you, all of all the speakers, and you, Clotilde and Chloe, for the organization of this event. It was a really interesting discussion, I think, and it was really important for us in Fondation Abbé Pierre to show that this issue of access to adequate housing and fight against housing exclusion is not only an issue in big capitals in Europe, but also in that kind of territories. So as we have seen, territories in decline face very different challenges, but there can be great opportunities to reinvent the city and the way to live in it. Different levels of skills can lead to different treatment of people experiencing housing exclusion. The withdrawal of public services from certain areas raise the question of equal treatment of citizens in the territories. And at the Fondation Abbé Pierre, we support projects to help to find some solutions in France. For example, we talk about access to services, and we used to promote some projects going towards as a solution. In Brittany, for example, we are financing a truck that travels through the deserted countryside to bring some social support services to the most isolated people. We spoke of a tendency for some families or individuals to settle in this countryside, and we have worked on this subject in Ardèche, for example, where retired people come to live, and this increases the prices of housing, and the region has decided to carry out work on the production of social housing by rehabilitating housing in old center. And we are also working with our SOS study program to rehabilitate substandard housing. And this creates a link with the people. It enhances the value of the building, and it helps to combat food poverty at the end. And finally, we support projects for settlement of vulnerable people in cities where they have the opportunity to improve their living conditions, a house with a lower rent, maybe employment when there are needs in the region. So the issue of we saw that the issue of relocalization, difficulties show us that this is not only we cannot just take people and put it in some areas, and It's possible only possible with a long and important work and the involvement of a local population and the construction of the interests of these projects. And we must listen. I think that it's my word to end to conclude this debate. We must listen to what elected representative, organization, citizens tell us about the needs, and we must adapt our policies, the policies to these needs. And it is important to don't let no one behind, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you again to all of you. I wish you a very good day. And I'll be back in touch with the presentation for follow-up. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Clotilde.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.